One of the worst feelings is not knowing if you're making progress, especially in cases where you've been learning English for some time. So in this episode, I want to share with you 7 signs that showed me that I was on the right path to becoming fluent in English. Stick around and see if you have already experienced those signs yourself. Hey there, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Before I start telling you about these signs, I want to know from you, how has your English progress been? Share your progress, share your story here in the comment section below. If you are on Spotify, you can also leave a comment with your story and your progress. I'm curious to know. But let's get started here with the first sign that showed me many years ago that I was on the right track when it comes to reaching fluency in English. The first thing that happened to me was I started dreaming in English. That's right. I started to dream in English. This started happening for me when I was around 18, 19 years old, around 2 and 3 years after I had started learning English seriously. And after 2-3 years of intense exposure to the language, it came to a point where I started to dream about the language. I started to dream that I was speaking English. I started to dream that I was listening to people around me speaking English. And when I was working at the call center, that was a very intense moment for me in my life, because I was working at the call center during the day, and that job involved speaking English for 6 hours, and then I would go to college at night. So I was really tired back then. It was a very intense routine. It even came to a point where I started to talk in my sleep in English. I remember one time, I don't remember now if it was my mom or my dad, probably my dad. He told me in the morning the next day that I was speaking English. I was talking in my sleep in English. He came to me and said, "Hey, did you know that you were speaking English or talking in English last night while you were sleeping?" And then I was like, "No, really?" And then he's like, "Yeah." So I think that happened at that time because I was really tired and I was having a very intense routine. But regardless, I think that if you have already started dreaming, at least dreaming in English, you don't have to talk in your sleep, but if you have already started to dream about the language, speaking the language, listening to the language, I view this as a good sign. I view this as a sign that you are finally starting to internalize the language. The language is slowly becoming a part of you. And this is really powerful. When I started teaching English, the same thing happened. I had some nights where I would dream I was teaching. I dreamt that I was teaching my first classes, at the time, beginner level classes. So if you have already experienced this, I would say that this is a good sign that the language is finding its way into yourself, into your brain, into yourself as a whole. Okay. And I want to leave you with a question here to reflect. If you haven't experienced this yet, ask yourself, how can I intensify my exposure to English? I think this is a natural thing that happens to learners. Once you've gained enough exposure to the language, there will come a time when you might start having some dreams where English is involved. So how can I intensify my exposure to the English language? Reflect on this question. The second sign I want to share with you that happened to me was, this one is going to be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to explain, okay? At some point in my journey, I started to dislike seeing and hearing my first language. I speak Brazilian Portuguese, as all of you know. So for a while, especially in the first years of my English learning journey, I started to dislike the sound of Portuguese, and I started to dislike seeing Portuguese anywhere because I was so engrossed with the English language. I was so obsessed with the English language, that everything I did was in English. And I mean literally everything. Everything I read was in English. Everything I watched was in English. The music I listened to, all in English. Even the language on my devices back then, my cell phone, my computer, I made sure that everything was in English. So it came to a point where I just couldn't stand seeing or hearing my native language, Brazilian Portuguese. And I'm not saying that you have to do this. I'm not advocating for getting rid of your native language or discarding your culture, the place you come from. No, nothing like that. But what I am saying is that if you really want to take your English to a very good level, you might need to obsess over it for a few years in your journey. That's what I did. In my first 3-4 years, I was obsessed with the English language. Everything to me in my life was about English. But after you've gone through that process of obsessing over the language, and after you've reached a comfortable level of proficiency in the language, things kind of come back full circle, I would say. Because nowadays, for example, I don't feel this need anymore to study English or to practice my English with such high intensity and obsession. Nowadays, I've come to a level when it comes to proficiency that I'm happy with. I am comfortable with this level of proficiency I have nowadays of the English language. Yes, I still maintain the contact with the language. I still learn 1 or 2 new pieces of vocabulary here and there, but it's not my main focus anymore. Nowadays, I just enjoy things using the language, but not necessarily studying it. So nowadays, I've come back to enjoying my first language. Nowadays, I catch myself watching things in Portuguese more often, watching Brazilian speakers more often. Nowadays, I catch myself reading books in Portuguese, So it comes full circle. I'm not saying that you have to discard your native culture, your native language, but I think that this short period of obsession over the English language needs to happen. And I would suspect that it happens to every successful learner, everybody who has learned English successfully as a second language, especially people who haven't traveled to an English-speaking country to do so. I suspect that these people, they had a little bit of obsession over the language, at least for a few years. But, some things I just can't get around to doing. For example, the language in my electronic devices. I've gotten so used over the years to using my computer, my phone, my TV, all in English, that nowadays I can't switch it to Portuguese. If I look at my computer right now, and if it's all in Portuguese, the menu and the options there, it looks so weird to me. The same thing on the phone, because I've gotten so used to using it in English. So I still keep my devices fully in English nowadays because, to me, it looks and feels more pleasant. Okay. But I would say that this is definitely a sign. If you have started to obsess over the English language a little bit, to the point that even you're not a huge fan of your native language anymore, or you don't want to know about your native language anymore, that's okay. That's normal. Maybe eventually in the future, you might come back to your native language and start using it more often. But I would say that this is definitely a sign that you are really incorporating English and heading towards fluency. Okay. But I want to leave you with this tip. Change the language in your devices to English. This is something so minor, so simple, and so easy to implement, but that it's so powerful. Get used to using your cell phone in English. Just go there to the settings, change the language to English, and you will see what that can do. I mean, again, it sounds insignificant, but it's not, guys. Moving on to the third sign I want to share with you. The third sign for me was actually having my first conversation in English with a native speaker. I was working at the drugstore at the time. It was my first job. By the way, guys, I'm talking about my jobs here, at the call center, at the drugstore. I've already shared about these experiences in more detail here on the podcast. So just look for these episodes here. You're going to find episodes where I share specifically about these work experiences that I had. But anyway, I was working at my first job at the drugstore. And then there was once this customer who walked in. It was an American woman. And I remember having a conversation with her of about 5 minutes. It was something really simple, talking about why she was visiting Brazil at the time, if she needed anything else in terms of products from the drugstore that I could help her with, things of that nature, even charging her and, collecting her payment. But then I remember that when she left, when she walked out of the store, I had this realization of, oh man, I just had a conversation in English with a native speaker, with an American. And I remember feeling over the moon. I was super excited about it when I had that realization that, so now I am able to start talking to people, to have interactions with people. So it was something simple. It was a short conversation, nothing, really deep, I would say. But it was definitely a sign for me that I was on the right track to reaching fluency. Okay. By the way, do you remember your first conversation in English? I'm curious to know, do you remember? If you do remember, who did you talk to and where? If you can remember that, share your experience here in the comment section below, because I wonder if many learners remember their first conversation in English. I certainly do. And to me, it was definitely a powerful sign that I was on the right track. Moving on here to sign number 4, I started consuming more demanding content. When I started learning English, I used to work a lot with music and movies. But then as I progressed and as I became better, I started to consume more demanding content. And it took me a while to realize this. I didn't realize that I was already consuming this more demanding content. For example, TED Talks. I had a TED Talk phase, guys. I had a TED Talk phase where all I watched back then was TED Talks. I loved watching TED Talks. TED Talks are great because, usually you have speakers there, mostly native speakers, who are experts in their field or very knowledgeable in their field, and they give a lecture, they give a speech about their expertise. So not only do you practice your English with these TED Talks, but you also learn new things and different ideas. So you improve yourself as a person, your general knowledge of things, but also you improve your English. So I definitely had a TED Talk phase where I watched a lot of TED Talks. Back then, podcasts already existed, but they were not nearly as popular as they are nowadays. Most podcasts in the past were just audio podcasts. It wasn't like today where you have video podcasts on YouTube and things of that nature. So even though podcasts existed back then, they weren't so popular as they are nowadays. So I remember that TED Talks for me for a while were really beneficial to learn new things, to improve my general knowledge, and also to improve my English as a whole. Nowadays, obviously, I love podcasts. I haven't been watching many TED Talks anymore, but I think I've kind of replaced that with the podcasts. So nowadays I love watching and listening to podcasts about various topics, and I'm still learning about things in general, increasing my general knowledge with these podcasts, and keeping my English skills, especially my listening skills, sharp by listening to them. So think to yourself if you have already done this, if you have already started consuming more demanding content, maybe content that you wouldn't even dream of consuming a few years ago. You know, guys, this happened recently to one of my students, and I'm going to mention him now, Carlos. Carlos, if you're listening to me, shout out to you, man. You know, Carlos told me that he usually listens to my podcast while at the gym, you know, so if you are listening to this one, shout out to you. You know, guys, Carlos, the student of mine, has been with me for a little over 2 years now. He's been having classes with me for a little over 2 years. And something interesting happened recently because I've noticed that he started to share in our group some more complex videos and podcasts talking about longevity, neuroscience, health in general, but not the kind of content that a typical intermediate learner would consume easily. So, and then I told him that, hey, man, this is great because, you know, this is a sign that your English is getting better and you are, you know, increasing your level of proficiency because look at the kind of podcasts you've been listening to. Maybe those podcasts, you wouldn't even dream about listening to them a couple of years ago. Yeah. But now he's already consuming this more demanding content. So this is definitely a sign, guys. If you have already been consuming more demanding content in English and you feel like to you it's normal to do that, this is an excellent sign that your English is going in the right direction. Okay. Now, sign number 5 is I started to understand language from movies and music I consumed when I was a kid. You know, guys, one of the things that my parents did when I was a kid was we would always watch movies in English together. My parents they weren't fans of dubbed movies since forever. So to me, growing up and watching subtitled movies was normal. Yeah, so from an early age, I would say that at least the listening, I started to listen to English a lot through the movies. And there were some movies from my childhood that I loved watching, and I watched them hundreds, if not thousands of times by now. Movies like Back to the Future, for example, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you know. But what's cool about it is that back then, I didn't know any English. So I would hear some phrases and some things in English. To me, they were just sounds of the movie. But nowadays, going back, I go like, oh, now I understand what they were saying all along. And this is a fascinating feeling. Just to give you an example, I mentioned the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's one of my top favorite movies of all time with Matthew Broderick, you know. It's great. If you haven't seen it, you gotta see it, guys. Come on. But anyway, there is this scene where Ferris and his friend Cameron are watching a baseball game. And then they have this chant. They chant this thing that when I was watching that movie as a kid, I had no idea what they were saying. Here's the clip.
Hey,
But nowadays, I know exactly what they were chanting. They were chanting, batter, 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 swing, batter. He can hit, he can hit, he can hit, swing, batter. Let me try to do that. Hey, batter, 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 swing, batter. He can hit, 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 swing, batter. Not as well as Cameron does it in the clip, but you got the gist, right? So just to explain that clip, by the way, in baseball, the batter is the player who hits the ball, whose turn is to hit the ball, because they usually use a baseball bat, right, to hit the ball. So that's the batter, the player who is supposed to hit the ball. And when the player makes that movement with the bat, this is a swing, okay? So he swings the bat, all right? So that's pretty much what these characters were chanting all along. Batter, 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 swing, batter. He can hit, he can hit. But, you know, the way he goes is something like he can hit, he can hit, he can hit, he can hit, swing, batter. But you see, having these discoveries in your journey is amazing. Things that you used to listen to a lot years ago when your English was not so good. And then nowadays, you are able to understand all of that. And then you go, oh my God, that's what they were saying all along. So if you've had that, this is definitely a sign that you are becoming more and more fluent in English. The same thing goes to music. I've always loved music, and nowadays I am able to understand the lyrics to my favorite song. So there have been some cases where I would love the song, but I wouldn't understand the lyrics. But then when I learned what the lyrics were talking about, I would find the lyrics so stupid, so silly. Like, really? This awesome song, and these are the lyrics to this awesome song? That kind of decreased my liking of the song a little bit. On the other hand, after I learned English, I was able to learn the lyrics to other songs that maybe as a kid, I didn't enjoy the music so much. But once I learned the lyrics and what meaning the lyrics carry, I started to enjoy that song more. And of course, the best combination that I find, which is when you have a very good song that has good music and great lyrics. If you have that, and then you have a masterpiece. Songs like Hotel California, for example, by the Eagles. That's a masterpiece. The music is awesome and the lyrics are also awesome. There's a whole story being told there. But you see, once you start understanding more and more your favorite movie lines, movie clips, or favorite songs, that's another sign that you are becoming fluent in English. Sign number 6, I achieved some things that I couldn't achieve before when I was just a beginner. For example, when I started learning English at 15, I had this desire, this dream of working in English, of having a job fully in English. But to me back then, this was so out there. But then it came to a point where I was doing it. And then realizing it was like, oh, look at this. Now I'm doing it. Now I'm working in English, just like I've always wanted. Or being able to interact and work with native speakers successfully. Once I realized that I was already doing that, that was another realization for me. Like, oh man, look at that. I am able to work with other native speakers of English, and we work together, we interact successfully. That's amazing. And like I just talked about, the content, understanding movies, TV shows, music, and consuming more demanding content. I want to share a little bit of a story here about another student of mine who had a very interesting case, because this student of mine has been with me for, I think, 4 years now. Yeah, he's been with me for a while. I would say at least 4 years now. And when we started having classes together, like 4 years ago, he wanted to improve his English so that he could feel more comfortable in meetings at work that were in English. He could feel comfortable going to a job interview in English. That's what he wanted. Because, he used to feel very insecure presenting something in English, being in a meeting in English. But recently, he's been presenting things in English at work. He's been invited to go to some English interviews. He's been through them. He has passed in those interviews. But then, at the end of the process, he realized it wasn't the best opportunity, so he dropped out of the race. But the point was, he was doing this. He was presenting things in English at work. He was joining English meetings. He was already having job interviews in English. And then the crazy thing is that in one of our classes recently, he said, oh man, I don't feel like my English is improving. I don't feel like my English is going anywhere. I feel like, I'm stuck. But then I told him, look, you've just passed a job interview. Do you remember like 3-4 years ago? You couldn't even conceive doing this. And now you're doing it. Look at this presentation that you have just prepared and you're going to give it tomorrow at work. I mean, could you picture yourself doing that like 3-4 years ago? You see, guys, so sometimes we are so close to ourselves that we miss realizing these things. Yeah. So it's important that you become aware of that, because for sure you have already made incredible progress in your English learning, but you might be blind to it. You might have not seen it or realized it. That's why I'm sharing these signs with you today. Okay. Finally, the last sign that showed me that I was truly becoming fluent in English back in the day was people started telling me how good my English was. It came to a point where I started to receive more and more positive feedback from random people about my English. Like, oh, Thiago, you have such good English. You speak English so well. Where did you learn English? How did you learn English? And my favorite question, where have you lived abroad? People would naturally assume that, I had lived abroad, but that wasn't the case. And keep in mind, guys, that I'm talking about years ago, okay? At least 10 years ago. Back then, I think that there was still this stigma of going abroad to become fluent, there was this belief still. I think that nowadays, many people here on YouTube, for example, many creators, many teachers have already busted this myth, right? That you don't have to go to an English-speaking country to become fluent in English, right? But back then, people wouldn't believe it. They would go like, oh, where did you live abroad? Where was your exchange program? So if you are starting to get positive feedback from people, maybe from your teacher, from your colleagues, that you sound good, that you are speaking well, this is probably a sign that you are on the right track. That's why I believe that positive feedback and constructive feedback is essential. Feedback is essential. So it's important that you are part of a group or part of a community where you get to have this feedback. Speaking of communities, I have my private community already up and running. If you are interested in learning more about it, I'm going to leave the link in the description of the video here and also in the show notes if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. But it's a place where learners just like you come together to interact, share cool stuff, cheer each other on. And by becoming a member of my community, you also unlock access to some really cool stuff. So learn more about it. Link in the description. Receiving feedback, especially positive, is definitely a sign that you are becoming truly fluent in English. And that's it, guys. These are the 7 signs that showed me that I was becoming fluent in English. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode today. And now I want to hear from you. Do you agree with these signs? Have you experienced any of these signs? And would you add another sign to this list? Let me know your thoughts here in the comment section below. A free way for you to support my work here is by subscribing to the channel on YouTube, liking this video, leaving a comment, and sharing this video with your contacts. Also, if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can just leave me a 5-star review over there. And if you want to take one step further with me, you can check out my pronunciation course, which is a course to teach you the main sounds of the English language, the main connected speech patterns of the English language, and also you can check out my private community, what's included in it, and how you can join. Guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I'm Thiago, I'm signing off, and I'll be talking to you very soon in the upcoming episode. Bye-bye.